Alright folks, hello and welcome to a lecture on the urinary system. And I feel like I've been working on this thing for weeks. It's a little complicated. I hope that we can sort of get the point across, and I wanted to get this thing to you as quick as possible, so we're going to shoot it here in the middle of the night at my house. And with that in mind, away we go. First things first, you know, water is very important to us in our daily lives, but it can in fact cause issues in some cases. The long story short of this is that your osmotic balance of your blood is incredibly important, and your kidneys are involved in helping to maintain that balance. What I want to do first is just tell you a little story about what's called water intoxication. All right, I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail here, but the long story short is there was a radio competition back in the days when that kind of thing still happened. I don't even know if it does anymore. But a radio competition where they brought folks in and had them drink a bunch of water and then try to not go to the bathroom for a prolonged period of time. And the person whom could hold their urine the longest won a gaming system. Okay? Well, the lady that won had to go to the hospital for a while as a result of this. And the lady that came in second place died. Okay? Absolutely died. So what I'm trying to tell you is we must maintain our general osmotic balance within the bloodstream, or we can die within short order. So kind of a neat thing. I would go into more detail, but we honestly have a lot to talk about. You should totally look up this situation. It's pretty terrifying. All right, let's begin. Man, let me tell you, your respiratory system. Your respiratory system, you got some lungs, you got some alveoli in there, you got some respiratory passages. There isn't a whole lot terribly complicated material happening. You're bringing in oxygen, you're getting rid of carbon dioxide, you're regulating a little bit of acidity and basicity within the system. But man, the urinary system is so darn complicated by comparison. Like, you look at this thing, you think, okay, you got a couple kidneys, you got these muscular ureters that lead down from the kidneys, there's a storage area in the bladder, and then a urethra that relieves urine from the system. You look at it and you think, wow, that's very simple. But man, the kidneys, okay? The kidneys, there's so much happening here, folks. It's just beyond belief, all right? So your kidneys are your main excretory organ. Now, what the heck is excretion? This is not defecation. This has nothing to do with the digestive system. The idea is that your kidneys take in massive quantities of blood, way more than you think, huge quantities of blood, and they will be capable then of filtering out potentially dangerous chemicals from your bloodstream. Think about uric acid components, these sorts of things that could build up in your system and become very toxic. Okay, so what your kidneys do is they help you to excrete potentially dangerous compounds. All right, specifically what we call nitrogenous wastes. So, main functions of the kidney, man, there's a lot. Number one is going to be to filter that blood plasma. Okay, the idea is that when blood enters your kidneys, pretty much the whole complement of the blood, except for the red blood cells and some other very large items, get pulled into the kidneys, processed, and then put back into the bloodstream. So pretty much the entirety of your blood plasma enters the kidney's filtrative apparatus, is dealt with, purified, and then gets stuck back into the bloodstream. Basically holding back things that your body wants to get rid of, like nitrogenous wastes, and then putting things back into the bloodstream that your body wants to keep, like nutrient molecules, ions, you know, this kind of thing. All right, number two, regulating blood volume and pressure. By regulating the amount of blood in the system, we are somewhat regulating the blood's pressure as well. And the kidneys do this. If you take certain medications that cause you to go to the bathroom constantly, your blood volume is going to drop like a rock. Alternatively, if you take certain medications that keep your kidneys from producing as much fluid, your blood volume is going to go up, and your pressure is going to vary to some degree with that as well. Number three, regulating the blood's osmolarity, which was the issue here. Okay. What your kidneys do is they basically regulate the amount of salt that's flowing around in your system. Your kidneys play a really important role dealing with the amount of salt in your system at any given period of time. And you're probably at least marginally aware of this. Like, you know that if you go to the emergency room, like if you have a burn victim or something like that, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to pour fluids into this person, okay? Absolutely pour fluids into them. But the fluid they pour in isn't just water. You can't just put water drip on somebody. It's obviously not going to work. What we do is we give them a saline solution, because your blood contains a sizable amount of salt in reality, a lot of ions in there, and that is going to be regulated by the kidneys. So the amount of salt regulated by the kidneys. And I'm going to talk about this and harp on it like the whole rest of this time. But you got to think about that water follows solutes, and specifically water follows the salt. So where the salt goes, the water follows. And if that is into the urine stream, then you're going to be producing lots of urine. And if that is into the kidneys to stay, then you're going to reduce your blood volume, or the amount of urine that you produce, I should say. Yeah, that'll do. All right, your kidneys are involved in the excretion of renin, an enzyme, which activates hormonal mechanisms that control your blood pressure and electrolyte balance. So playing with the kidneys and the amount of urine they produce. Number 5, secretes the hormone erythropoietin, which you are very much aware of at these times, at least I hope. Erythropoietin being very important for the maintenance of red blood cell levels within the body. Basically, when the kidneys pick up a low oxygen environment, they release erythropoietin. This causes the red bone marrow to produce more red blood cells that ups the oxygen carrying capacity of the body until the kidneys are happy with the amount of oxygen in the blood and they cease producing erythropoietin. All right, number 6, they collaborate with the lungs in regulating your acid-base balance of the body. Your urine has a pH of around 6. What that means is that we like to offload a little bit of acidity, if you will, hydrogen ions in essence, through the urine. So the urine is going to be involved in basically regulating blood pH, and by comparison, human body pH. Number 7, final steps in synthesizing the hormone calcitriol, which contributes to calcium homeostasis. Think vitamin D. So the terminal production of vitamin D is going to be happening in here. The idea is that you can't absorb blood calcium without vitamin D, and you're not going to have functioning vitamin D without the kidneys. So the kidneys play a very important role in blood calcium homeostasis. And then last but not least, gluconeogenesis, which you should remember from the last lecture. Gluconeogenesis is where we take amino acids and break them down, and we can rebuild fresh, new glucose. Glucose. Neo, new. Genesis, to make. We make new glucose to basically feed the brain is a really good example of this. In situations where we don't have any dietary sugars coming in. I say extreme starvation, but these days there are plenty of diets out there where you're going to be pretty much ketogenic, where you're not going to be bringing in any carbohydrates, a low-carb diet as you were. And gluconeogenesis is going to be important to this because the brain needs glucose. All right, so let's make sure we're all on the same page here. Make sure we know what we're looking at. We got 2 kidneys, a pair of ureters, and these ureters are very muscular. These are not just tubes, they're not just straws. These are muscular and they are capable of peristalsis. They will pump urine down to the kidneys. The point of connection here is right in there with the renal artery and renal veins. Renal artery carrying massive quantities of blood into the kidneys. Renal veins then relieving that blood from the kidneys after it's been cleansed. And this is all going to be connecting at this little point called the renal hilum here. Okay, sort of this indentation, if you will. Now your kidneys are about the size of your fist. And what you should notice is the right one is a little bit lower, the left one's a little bit higher. The reason for this is because the liver's up here kind of pushing down on that kidney, making it a little bit lower on the right-hand side. And you can see that they're capped off by little adrenal glands. Okay, yeah, I think that'll work. Yeah, I think that'll do. Okay, let's go here. All right, excretion. So what we're talking about here is just how we rid the body of certain waste products. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on this. You should be marginally familiar with it at this stage. I'm basically just trying to make a point. And that is that your respiratory system is certainly excretory. Carbon dioxide could be considered an excreted waste. It's a side effect of your general metabolism along with certain other materials. Your integumentary system is capable of relieving certain salts from your system. Again, why does your dog lick your arm? Why do you taste sweat and it tastes salty? There are certain materials that are excreted via the integumentary system. Urea is also excreted in sweat, so this is going to play into the urinary system as well. Your digestive system, obviously, is marginally excretory. We will release certain things from the body via the excretory system. Bile really comes to mind. Again, think about the breakdown of red blood cells and those toxic groups that are built into there. We can relieve certain, like cholesterol is a really good example as well. So that is going to be excreted from the body via your digestive system. And then last but not least, where we're at today, that is the urinary system. So your urinary system is going to cleanse the blood of all sorts of different metabolic wastes. Uric components, nitrogenous waste products being key amongst these, but a whole host of things, okay? Toxins, drugs, certain hormone salts, hydrogen ions, again, let's think acidity, water, if we have too much in the system, playing with the blood's osmolarity, just a bunch. There's a lot going on here. And that's going to take us here. I just want to talk a little bit about what these wastes are and sort of where they come from. So first things first, we have urea here. Urea is a side effect of protein metabolism. So as we break down proteins into their amino acids and we kick off their these ammonia groups, if you will, this is going to be converted into urea. Trying not to fall off my stool here. Converted into urea that's going to be excreted via the kidneys. Uric acid, byproduct of nucleic acid catabolism. If you consume foods that are super high in certain nucleic acids, you can get gout. It's a buildup of uric acid in your joint cavities. Uric acid, again, a byproduct of nucleic acid breakdown. Your kidneys help to get rid of this. Creatinine. So creatinine is a breakdown product of creatine phosphate. So you probably, I hope, remember back in Anatomy 1 talking about the creatine phosphate pathway for the generation of ATP in your musculature. So this is going to be a byproduct of all this. And if you follow the structures here, folks, these N's and H's floating around here, these are nitrogenous waste products. Okay, these are the nitrogenous waste products. And worthy of mention here, so a lot of these are going to be formed into these units for getting rid of it in the body, but they're all based off of ammonia in the long run. And that sort of brings up the smell that you get in a bathroom, okay? Man, let me tell you, you can wander into a gross gas station or something along those lines, and bathrooms tend to have a pretty predictable stink. They have that urine-y smell, but the urine itself tends to not have a smell to it. Urine, however, is readily broken down, potentially by bacteria as an example, into ammonia, which is quite gaseous. We can indeed pick up the smell of this. So when you wander into one of these hot, gross bathrooms at some service station while you're traveling, the stink in there is from bacteria breaking down urine that's gotten on the floor, typically. Okay, and what they're doing is they're releasing ammonia, so it's pretty disgusting. It's a good way to know if you're in a gross place or not, and yet another reason to tell your kids to touch absolutely nothing. Yeah, that'll work. Now, I will talk a little bit more about these a little bit later on, but sometimes some of these uric acid components, or uric components, I should say, can build up in the system. We normally try to hold them down to about 10 to 20 milligrams per deciliter, but if this changes, okay, if your blood urea, for example, goes up too much, we call that azotemia. This is basically just telling us that we have too much nitrogen in the bloodstream, which is a problem. And then there's uremia, I should say. Uremia is what we typically have to go through dialysis to deal with. So if the kidneys are not producing correctly, there's a whole host of problems that are associated with this. This is from a buildup of uric components in the bloodstream, so uremia. Yeah, that'll do. Just long story short, these are kidney issues. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the urinary system itself. So again, a couple kidneys, the right one being a little bit low, about the size of your fist. 2 muscular ureters, which will pump urine down to the bladder. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. So we've got down here at the bladder what's called the trigon of the bladder. What we have are the openings of the ureters here and there, and then the opening of the urethra here. Okay, so the trigon of the bladder, tri meaning three. This is where three things connect. You got two entrances and one exit. The two entrances from the ureters coming in, carrying urine to the bladder, and then the urethra carrying urine out of the bladder via two sphincters. Okay, there's what's called an internal urethral sphincter and an external urethral sphincter. The internal sphincter is made out of smooth muscle, and it's under involuntary control, and the external urethral sphincter is under somatic motor control. So it's skeletal muscle, long story short. And we'll talk more about why that is at the end of this. But the idea here is that your body has the ability to open this internal urethral sphincter without your consent, if you will. And this basically tells you when you need to go to the bathroom, and then you can choose when to open the external urethral sphincter in order to micturate or not, i.e. to go to the bathroom to urinate. Micturation being the fancy term for going to the bathroom for urination. Now, worthy of note here is that there are sexual dimorphisms seen in the urinary system. So in the female, the bladder is just right behind the body wall, right? About 4 centimeters of total urethral length. So it's very short indeed. Whereas in a male, the urethra is quite long indeed, having to travel through a whole host of other materials to get out of the body, again up to about 20 centimeters. And this... Man, there's a lot to talk about here, but I'll mention a few things. So urinary tract infections are far more likely in females because of this really short urethra here going up into the bladder. So your chance of having external bacteria make their way up into the urinary system are far more elevated in a female. So you would tend to see, because of this really short urethra, you tend to see a lot higher rates of urinary tract infections in females. And then by comparison in males, because there's all this other stuff happening, there tends to be potential for associated problems. Probably the most famous amongst these being prostate issues. As seen here, there's the prostate. So the bladder releases urine down through the prostate, through the urethra, and then out of the penis itself. The idea behind the prostate is that this thing can swell up as we age. Swell is probably a poor term. It enlarges, okay? Through a variety of means, but it will get larger as a man ages, and what this tends to do is it will constrict urine flow. Not trying to make light of the situation, it's just the truth. It's not uncommon to wander into a bathroom. There's some older guy going to the bathroom there, and he's going to stand there for 5 or 10 minutes. Alright, it's just reality. When the prostate swells, it sort of limits urine flow, so you don't get appropriate micturation speed, if you will. Alright, yeah, I think that'll do. Alright, good. Let's go here. The kidneys and their location. So your kidneys are considered what we call retroperitoneal. So your peritoneal cavity with your intestines and all that fun stuff is up here. The kidneys are not in that. The kidneys are behind it. So you can see the lining here, okay? And behind that lining is where we find the kidneys. The kidneys are held in place via some ligamentation, but mostly a big wad of fat. Okay, they have this really thick fat capsule, if you will, and this fat capsule will surround the kidneys and then anchor it to underlying tissues, musculature, what have you. But the kidneys, because of the nature of their location, they sort of are more likely to be impacted externally, so the ribs don't really cover the kidneys terribly well, so a punch in the back or some sort of impact to the back can damage the kidneys. And kind of interestingly, the way that they are held in place somewhat loosely provides that they can kind of move around a little bit within the body, and that can cause some issues, all right? So here we've got an old guy from way on back in the day. It's probably 1920s, and if you look at this motorcycle he's on, man, I wish I had one. Like, geez, what a beautiful piece of machinery, but there's no suspension on it at all. So if you look, guy is wearing kind of an interesting piece of garmentage there. This is called a kidney belt. It's not uncommon in motorcycle groups back in the day, or somebody that's going to be riding in races, what have you. They would wear these kidney belts, and what that would do is it would squeeze the back and sort of help to support the kidneys and keep them from bouncing around as much. I've heard plenty of stories from old biker guys riding around on motorcycles that didn't have any suspension, and when they get off the bike and they go to the bathroom, their urine contains not a small amount of blood. Okay, and that's because the kidneys are being jostled around and beaten up as a result of their location, the way that they're suspended. So when you go to the bathroom, there's a little bit of blood in the urine. Kind of scary thing, but is reality. All right, this is sort of how this works, and I think that'll do. Yeah. All right, good. Retroperitoneal, key term. Now let's walk through the kidney itself and make sure we understand its internal structures. So what we've done is gotten a nice frontal section. We can see the outer portion, this fibrous capsule of the kidney, and then we're going to work our way in. Now, first things first, renal cortex, renal medulla, renal pelvis. Okay, the renal cortex is this external portion here. Outside of these structures you can see there, so this is the cortex out here. The renal medulla is in here where we find these pyramid shapes. They are actually called the renal pyramids. Okay, you can see them nice and clear, nice renal pyramids here. So this is the renal medulla. And then the renal pelvis itself would be here. This structure is the renal pelvis. And the renal pelvis is basically the upper portion of the ureter where the ureter is connecting to the kidneys. And the renal pelvis is still muscular, I should say. So it's going to be peristaltically active and pump urine down into these ureters. Now, I'm going to go through all the parts and pieces here. I may be doing this a little bit too early, but we're just going to lay into it, and I'm pretty much going to tell you how the urinary system works right now. So let's just roll on into this and hope for the best. All right, here we go. So the functional unit of filtration in the kidney is called a nephron. All right, nephrons are the functional units of the kidney, and the nephrons are primarily found out here in the cortex. Okay. Parts of the nephrons will dip down into the renal medulla, but they're mostly found out here in the renal cortex. Okay, so they're going to be filtering blood, doing what they do, making the urine, and then the urine is going to get dumped into these structures called the collecting ducts, and collecting ducts are found inside of these renal pyramids. So if you look at the renal pyramid, it looks really stripy. That stripy appearance is because all these tubes are leading down. This is just a whole bunch of tubes leading from the nephrons out here in the cortex. All these tubes leading down into what are called these renal papillae. That would be the ends of the pyramids. They stick out here, as you can see, and they are entering into what are called minor calyces. And it's got to be labeled somewhere around here. Minor calyx. There we go. So what we have is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 minor calyxes in this particular example. There's actually some weird things that can happen in the kidneys. So let's not worry about the numbers here, just realize that these are minor calyces. Now, bring together 2 minor calyxes, you form a major calyx. Bring together the major calyces and you form a renal pelvis. This is not unlike the arterial network, and you got to look for the branches or the, oh geez, where did we just talk about this? Looking inside of a lymph node or what have you. It's the same basic concept. So what we have is fluid coming in, being dealt with, and then pretty much from the cortex in, it's all just piping. It's plumbing, okay? So we're going to have small pipes leading into a larger pipe leading into a much larger pipe leading into another larger pipe, and then being pumped down to the bladder. All right, is that all I want to say here? I think it is. So let me just run through this one more time to make sure we're good. So you've got this renal cortex where the nephrons are found. The renal medulla is inside of that, containing these renal pyramids. The renal pyramids are going to be where we find our collecting ducts, which you're going to be hearing about soon. That's going to leak what is basically just urine into the minor calyxes. Minor calyxes come together to form a major calyx. Major calyces come together to form a renal pelvis, which is muscular and pumps urine through the ureter and then down to the bladder. All right, good. So let's see, what else do I want to say here? I think I'll talk about this more later, but your kidneys receive a massive fraction of blood, about 21% of your cardiac output. Okay, so 21% of the blood that's pumped by the heart is going to come straight to the kidneys. So this is very important to us, obviously. We have to constantly be filtering our blood, so massive quantities of blood are going to be coming in via these renal arteries and leaving via these renal veins. So coming in via the renal arteries, carrying all kinds of nitrogenous waste and other potential toxins. That's going to be filtered out by this mechanism I just sort of outlined, and then sent back out via the renal vein. All connecting here at this renal hilum, as I mentioned previously. Yeah. All right, good. Let's go here. Renal circulation. Yeah, I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail on this. Hey, look at here. It's almost like I Wrote this up for a reason. 21% of renal output, the renal fraction, or cardiac output, I should say, referred to as the renal fraction. What I want to show you is that these renal arteries, this renal artery is going to come in, and it's going to branch profusely. All right, it is going to branch profusely into massive, massive numbers of incredibly small capillaries, and you can see these branching into the renal cortex. So the blood comes in, branches, leaks out plasma in the renal cortex, and then that's going to be filtered back through and down to the bladder with the blood that's been cleaned going out via this renal vein. Yeah. You can actually see a nice image of this here. So this is a picture I took in North Carolina. This is a example of a urinary system that has had the blood vessels injected with an elastomeric dye, and that elastomeric dye will solidify, and then you can digest away the organic parts. So you can see probably the aorta come down here, this descending abdominal aorta, and then these renals cutting into the kidneys. And if you look at how brushy this is, see all these little lines there? The kidneys are just a big ball of capillaries at this cortex, all right? The cortex of the kidneys is just a big ball of capillaries. And it's at that point that the initial filtration happens. And basically what we have here is a little breakdown of a nephron. By the time you get from the cortex to about right there, what will be urine is already urine. So the urine formation is done. All the filtration is basically done, and then it's just piping. It's just plumbing. It's just headed down to the bladder. Yeah. All right, so let's go into conversation on the nephrons here. So what you see here is a breakdown of pretty much what I just told you. Get your renal cortex out here. Have your renal pyramids come down to minor calyxes, to a major calyx, or I should say major calyces into a renal pelvis, and then down to the ureter. What we need to do now, let me grab my drink over here, folks. What we need to do now is just kind of have a little bit of conversation on what a nephron is, what a nephron does, and what a nephron looks like. All right, here we go. So, what a nephron is a filtration apparatus. It's this ball of capillaries at the beginning here, and then the nephron is basically all these tubes all the way back to what's called a collecting duct. So between this ball of capillaries and that collecting duct, that's a nephron. And you got a lot of them. About 1 million a kidney. Okay, actually more than that. More than 1 million a kidney. And these are microscopic little balls of capillaries. We have this little structure here that sort of cups this ball of capillaries, and that's referred to as Bowman's capsule. And the ball of capillaries itself is referred to as a glomerulus. Do I even have all this on here? I'm probably jumping ahead here, team. Again, this is a lengthy PowerPoint. But the idea here is that these are indeed nephrons, and these nephrons are the functional units of the kidney. You got lots of them in there. So what the heck do they do? Well, they regulate the general concentrations of water and general soluble substances, like salt as a good example, by, first, filtering the blood. It's called glomerular filtration. Reabsorbing certain materials from that back into the kidney. It's called tubular reabsorption. Okay, and then excreting certain waste products. Oh, geez, my dyslexia. Excreting certain waste products. There we go. Back into the urine. The nature of it is as follows, team. At this glomerulus, at this structure within Bowman's capsule here, this little ball of capillaries at the beginning of the nephron, pretty much the whole complement of blood plasma enters into this tubule network. Okay? Pretty much the whole complement of blood plasma enters into this. Basically anything that can get out of these glomerular capillaries. Okay? Long story, but we're going to get to it in just a second. So the whole complement of blood plasma leaks in and it gets pulled through this tubular network. During this process, your body will reabsorb almost all of it. Okay? Almost all of it gets reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. And then, right at the end of all this, we have the capacity to release certain products back into the urine stream. So when your body's got certain things that you want rid of, one of the ways that we get rid of certain things is via excreting them into the urine. This is a really good example of how urinary-based blood tests work, okay? So if you want to know if somebody's on drugs, as an example, they tend to take a urine test, and the reason for this is that your kidneys will pick up that certain drug-based compounds are in the bloodstream. They're like, wow, that's not supposed to be there. So the kidneys will get rid of them via excretory processes, putting that into the what will become the urine stream, and then going down into the bladder from there. Yeah. All right, this will do. Speaking of the glomerulus. All right, so glomerulus actually means something like a ball of yarn, like a yarn ball that you would knit with, if you will. I don't know much about it, but you get my point. A ball of yarn. Glomerulus means ball of yarn, I think, in Latin. So this is supposed to look like a ball of yarn. But what this actually is a big ball of capillaries. Boy, whew, this is a can of worms to talk about, team. We have so much to do here. So I feel so mentally spent after building this thing. All right, here we go. So this glomerulus itself is made of fenestrated capillaries. So these are capillaries that have a bunch of small pores in them, and these pores are incredibly leaky. Now, pay attention. What we have is an afferent arteriole and an efferent arteriole, both considered arteries, okay? Afferent arteriole coming in, forming the glomerulus, and then the efferent arteriole coming out, carrying blood away from the glomerulus. Look at the size variance here. This is important. The afferent arteriole is massive. The efferent arteriole is quite small. What this will do is it causes lots of blood flooding into this glomerulus, and the glomerulus to balloon outward, if you will, to fill with blood every time the heart beats, and have a big pressure buildup inside of Bowman's capsule here, this glomerular capsule, Bowman's capsule, because the blood comes in, but it can't go out quickly because the efferent arteriole is so small. This elicits these fenestrated capillaries to be incredibly leaky. And they are, man. They leak out massive quantities of fluid. Again, small things, soluble things, not red blood cells, not the formed elements. It's got to be smaller than that. Basically, the whole complement of the blood plasma and anything dissolved in it. But the glomerular filtration rate is easily measured, and it equates out in a normal size, like an adult male, for example, to about 125 milliliters per minute. That is 180 liters per day. Like, think about a 2-liter Coke bottle, right? How many of those per day are filtered by your glomeruli? That would be a lot of those. 180 liters in a day filtered. We only have about 5 liters of blood, so what that means is that our blood gets cleaned between 50 and 60 times per day. Okay? 50 to 60 times per day. So that is a lot of cleaning. That's a lot of cleaning. Now, if you've only got 5 liters of blood to lose, and you're pulling 180 liters per day, clearly only a very small portion of that is going to become urine. Okay, a very, very small portion. Almost all of it flowing through this tubular network of the nephron itself, from this glomerulus through the tubular network. Almost all of the fluid that's left out, or released, I should say, from these fenestrated capillaries, almost all that fluid goes right back into the bloodstream via reabsorptive processes. But again, the idea is that this material is going to be moved through the kidneys, I should say, many times in a day. Many times in a day. Yeah. Oh, I put a little stat on here. Kidneys use 25% of the body's oxygen. So all of these nutrient molecules and things, all of this good stuff that your body wants to keep, it's going to have active transport proteins in these kidney tubules that are going to be picking up, like glucose being a classic example. Active transport proteins picking up glucose from the urine stream and then putting that back into the body's bloodstream, back into the blood. And because of all of this active transport of moving things back into the bloodstream, this is going to cause the kidneys to use copious quantities of oxygen. So part of this glomerular filtrative process requires mass quantities of oxygen. So this is yet another reason why the kidneys get so much blood flow. This is yet another reason why the kidneys use so much oxygen. Yeah. So do I have anything else on here? I'm pretty happy. Let's continue. Big afferent arteriole, small efferent, fenestrated capillaries, Bowman's capsule. Yeah, it's a glomerulus. leading out to what's called the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, before I move on, man, I really struggled about where I wanted to put this little conversation. We got a few slides that we got to do, which I consider pretty complicated, on glomerular filtration rate. So if you go back to here, I've got my 180 liters. This is capable of changing. So we can make our glomerular filtration rate go up or down a little bit, but what we want to do is make it very steady. So how do we make sure, with the variations in our blood pressure throughout the course of a day, the variations in our blood osmolarity throughout the course of a day, how do we make sure that we can keep our systems processing blood, forming appropriate urine? You have gone to the bathroom before and your urine's been virtually transparent. You've gone to the bathroom before and you've seen your urine be incredibly dark and full of toxins. How do we make sure that the kidneys can get their job done with all of the variations that occur in general human homeostasis? Well, we need to go through and have a little bit of conversation about glomerular filtration. And the first thing we got to do is talk about the filtration membrane itself. So when we look at the glomerulus, all right, when we look at this glomerulus, we can see little podocytes and things in here. They look something like this. These are little cells, these podocytes. And this membrane is as follows. One, we have the fenestrated endothelium of the glomerular capillaries. That would be the capillary lining. If you recall, your capillaries are made of an endothelial cell, little simple squamous cells, and these in particular are fenestrated. Fenestrations are the openings here, so these pores, if you will. Next, we have a basement membrane between things, if you will. You can sort of see this basement membrane demonstrated in here. This basement membrane is made out of a proteoglycan gel, not unlike what holds your areolar connective tissue together. In fact, that plays a major role here. And interestingly, it's negatively charged. All right, all this gel-like substance is negatively charged. So what that does is, not only are the pores going to be selective as to what they let out into the Bowman's capsule for filtration, but the negative charge of this basement membrane is going to negate some molecules from being capable of passing. Okay, so this is very important, very important. So certain things stay in the bloodstream as a result of the negative charge of this basement membrane. Yeah, okay. So just as an example of how that works, your blood plasma contains about 7% protein dissolved inwardly, whereas the filtrate that makes its way into Bowman's capsule is only about 0.03% protein, i.e. most of those stay in the bloodstream because of the charge of that basement membrane. Kind of a neat thing. And then last but not least are these filtration slits. We've got our podocytes here. They are going to be lining these capillaries where the fenestrations are, and these podocytes have these little slits within them, okay, filtration slits, and yeah, they basically just form another layer of barrier that will prevent certain things from being able to move through easily, okay? So they're going to help out with the filtrative process. I'm pretty happy with that, team. So you can kind of figure out what comes in and what goes out. So who stays in the blood? Well, your blood cells do. Big plasma proteins do. Big anions, again, think about the charge here, are going to stay inside the bloodstream. You got certain things that stay in the blood. So what comes out? Well, you can probably guess. Water does. Certain electrolytes, glucose, amino acids, the small stuff, folks. The small stuff. Vitamins, uric acid components, creatinine. All of that will make its way into becoming urine. So our membrane is as follows, and this is important. Fenestrated endothelium, got little holes in it. A basement membrane, which is charged. It prevents certain materials from passing. And then these little slits in these podocytes that are very small, limiting the size of materials that can then get through into Bowman's capsule. So this system is a good filter. Okay, certain things just can't pass out of the bloodstream, but what does is going to be run through the kidney and dealt with. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about glomerular filtration rate. Alright, so we have to kind of tightly maintain our glomerular filtration rate. We want it to keep around what we said previously. Again, males about 180 liters per day. Females about 150 liters per day. The amount of filtrate, again, is going to go through the kidney about 50, 60 times in a day. It's going to be filtered. and the vast majority of fluid that goes through this capsule into the filtrative process, about 99% of that is going to be pumped right back into the bloodstream. So only a very small amount of urine is produced in a day, which is a good thing because we only have so much blood in our bodies, only so much water to be moving things. So the vast majority needs to stay in the body. Now, what we want to do is keep our glomerular filtration rate, the amount of fluid running through this system, from being too high or too low. It's got to be sort of tightly regulated via homeostatic processes right in here. So if glomerular filtration rate's too high, that means that materials are going to be flowing through your kidney tubules entirely too fast. And if they're flowing too fast, then all of the transport proteins that we spoke of previously, they're not going to be capable of pulling materials back into the bloodstream fast enough. So you're going to be losing a lot of electrolytes, a lot of salts, what have you, via the urine stream because they just can't be taken back up as fast as they should. And what that will do is, by increasing the solute concentration in the urinary filtrate, that means that more water stays in the urine, and that makes you produce a very diluted but high volume urine output. So you're going to be producing lots and lots of urine as a result of this, and you're going to be losing a lot of nutrients and other key materials that your body needs as a result. So we don't want too fast a glomerular filtration. We got to keep it regulated. And then by comparison, we don't want glomerular filtration rate to be too low. If fluid stays in these tubules for too long, your body will start taking up things it's not supposed to take up, and i.e. you can be taking up excess uric acid components, and you can end up with azotemia, as we spoke of a little bit previously. So you can begin reabsorbing wastes as a result of the urine sitting around this urinary filtrate, this glomerular filtrate, sitting around in the kidney tubules for too long. So what we have to do is we have to tightly regulate glomerular filtration, and we do this via 3 homeostatic mechanisms. They're all working together all the time right now as you're listening to this to keep your urinary flow regulated around where it needs to be. And these 3 processes are renal autoregulation, which is super cool from my perspective, general sympathetic control, which is pretty straightforward, and then hormonal controls, which we're going to be harping on like the whole rest of this class. All right, here we go. Let's talk about renal autoregulation. What I tried to do is keep this all 1 slide each. I tried to limit myself to 1 slide each because we just don't have the time. All right, here we go. Autoregulation. So this is going to be the nephron sort of adjusting itself without any outside inputs. It's a very simple, elegant process, like the myogenic mechanism here and the tubuloglomerular, I should say, feedback mechanism here. So let's just talk about it. So the nature of this myogenic mechanism is very simple. We got an afferent arteriole bringing blood flow in, and an efferent arteriole bringing blood flow out. My dyslexia is hitting me hard today, team. The idea is this: if the arterial oh yeah, geez, it's going to be a rough one, team. If the arterial blood pressure is high, that will stretch out the arterioles and cause them to naturally constrict, okay? And if they constrict, this afferent arteriole, if it constricts, it will limit the amount of blood going into the glomerulus, and that will limit glomerular filtration. So if the amount of blood going in is too high, it causes a stretching action, and this will cause the smooth muscle in the afferent arteriole, or I should say afferent arteriole, to constrict a little bit, and that limits blood flow. By comparison, if the amount of blood flow is low, oh man, these L's are hitting me, man. If the amount of blood flow is low, this will cause very little stretch to the afferent arteriole, and that will let it relax and let lots of blood flow into the glomerulus. So just the nature of either stretching or relaxing this afferent arteriole will play a role in the amount of blood that flows through the glomerulus, and thus the glomerular feedback, or I'm sorry, the glomerular filtration rate. There we go. Then there's tubuloglomerular feedback. The long story short is that images like this are really underselling it. The truth is that these last parts of these tubules loop around and sort of abut the very beginning of the system. So as fluid flows through these tubules, this will be curled around and sitting right up against this, and that's sort of what they're showing you here, as we have these nephron pieces just touching right against the glomerulus itself and the fluid in here, its general osmotic balance, all this fun stuff. Your body senses the variations that occur at the end of this tubular network, and you'll have feedback into the glomerulus, thus tubulo-glomerular feedback. So if this fluid is not homeostatically balanced in the way that your body wants, it can limit or increase the amount of blood flow into the glomerulus. Yeah, I think that'll do. So it's this internal feedback. So this loop has an ability to communicate internally via these mesangial cells and basically change the glomerular filtration rate. Then there is sympathetic control. This is a very straightforward process. All right, folks, I have changed my seating arrangement a little bit. I was trying to do this from a stool and it just wasn't working out, so I've changed back to my slightly, and I do mean slightly, more comfortable chair. And we're going to try to teach from this, just because it's just wasn't working out the other way. So let's see what happens. So we've got sympathetic control here, very straightforward. Your sympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system has the ability to innervate the arterial network of your kidneys. Long story short of this is that your sympathetic nervous system has the ability to constrict or dilate your afferent arterioles. So if you constrict the afferent arteriole, that's going to limit blood flow into the kidney, or I should say into the glomerulus, limiting urine production. And alternatively, if you dilate the afferent arteriole, still using the sympathetic nervous system, that will increase the amount of production here in the Bowman's capsule. And you probably understand this a little bit at least. So during, for instance, strenuous exercise, you're not really concerned by urine production, so that can be decreased. You can actually change the amount of blood flow to the area to send more blood into the muscles during extreme emergencies, as an example. But you probably grasp that we can, well, dadgum, there's just so much to say here. Whenever you're nervous and your sympathetic nervous system is kind of going haywire, it might make you go to the bathroom a lot. Like, I'll never forget taking a test one time back in the day. It's like a 2.5-hour test, and I bet I went to the bathroom 3 times during that thing. There's no telling what the person administering the test thought about me and my professionalism. Probably thought I was going to the bathroom trying to cheat on the test or something, but the reality was I was just so daggum nervous that I had to go to the bathroom a lot, right? So your sympathetic nervous system certainly plays a role in general glomerular filtration rate. And one of the important parts of this is that when we limit, again, think about this, 20% of blood flow going to the kidneys. When we limit blood flow into the kidneys, that blood then goes somewhere else, and typically that would be, like, for instance, into the skeletal muscles to assist you in emergency situations. And then last but not least is hormonal control, and this is really fancy and super cool, but it's oftentimes called the renin-angiotensin mechanism. I'm sorry, renin. Geez, the dyslexia is hitting me, folks. The renin-angiotensin mechanism, or what your book calls the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism. Okay, what this is a really elegant stepwise process. So we have angiotensinogen produced by the liver. Renin is going to be released in the kidneys as a result of low blood pressure. Let's say that one more time. When blood pressure is low, the kidneys release renin to help to make sure that we have appropriate glomerular filtration rate. So renin converts the angiotensinogen found in the bloodstream into angiotensin 1. That travels into the lungs to be converted into angiotensin 2. And the long story short of this is that this hormone acts on multiple aspects of the body. Okay, multiple aspects of the body. And what this is going to do, long story short, is it's going to raise your blood pressure. Okay, you're going to be thirsty. The hypothalamus is going to trigger a thirst reaction, if you will. It's going to make you want to get something to drink. It's going to increase your blood's volume. Vasoconstriction in certain areas of the body, increasing the general blood pressure of the system. And then you're going to retain sodium. And as a side effect of that, you're going to retain water. Okay, remember, water chases the solute. Sodium here, think salt. That's going to be a solute. So if you're retaining sodium, that means you're going to be retaining water. All of these things lead to elevated blood pressure, and elevated blood pressure tends to increase glomerular filtration rate. So this all plays into our conversation. All right, good. Let's go here. All right, so let's talk about our parts of a nephron. So we're getting back into more straightforward stuff from my perspective, and it's going to go something like this. What we have is our glomerulus, Bowman's capsule surrounding the glomerulus. That's going to move into the proximal convoluted tubule. The proximal convoluted tubule is special because it has microvilli. These microvilli are going to be there for one reason and one reason only. That is to increase absorptive capacity. Remember, where we have microvilli, we are better at absorbing things. And it's... Sorry, somebody's heater cut on outside. Anyway, where we have microvilli, we're better capable of absorbing things. So these are going to be areas for tubular absorption, reabsorption, okay, that we talked about previously. That's going to go down this nephron loop, and the nephron loop plays all kinds of games with general solute balance in the renal medulla. So if you look up here, the cortex, so your cortex is basically going to be above this line. So the cortex is kind of this blue pin. All this would be in the cortex, and then the loop of Henle tends to descend down into the renal medulla, which is much saltier, and playing with that salt balance is going to allow us to take up a bunch of excess water. Anyway, long story. All right, glomerulus, Bowman's capsule. Into the proximal convoluted tubule, which is important because it has microvilli, dipping down the loop of Henle, which is important for maintaining salt balance, into the distal convoluted tubule, which then passes into a collecting duct. That is a nephron. Okay, this is a nephron. That will be passing urine into a collecting duct, and at that stage it's pretty much urine, and it's going to be moving down. Pretty much all the collecting duct does is play with water balance, because again, the collecting ducts are going to be going down through the renal medulla, and you're going to find that the renal medulla is incredibly salty, and this helps us to regulate the amount of water that's released as urine. Yeah, that'll do. All right. So the flow here as resulting glomerular filtrate is going to look something like this. The glomerulus through the tubules of the nephron, proximal tubule, loop of Henle, distal tubule, into collecting ducts. Do I have a slide? I do. Into collecting ducts, which would be in the renal pyramids. Renal pyramids to minor calyces to major calyx to renal pelvis, and the renal pelvis down a ureter and out of the body. So the renal cortex is where you find the nephron, and these renal pyramids are where we find the collecting ducts. Okay, so the reason that the renal pyramids always have a stringy appearance when you look at the real ones is because they're basically just a whole bunch of tubes leading from the cortex down to a minor calyx. Yeah, I think that'll do. Good. Let's go here. So the three processes of urine formation are as follows. Glomerular filtration, which we have harped on endlessly in this lecture so far. Tubular reabsorption, which I've spoke of briefly. And then tubular secretion that we talked about as pumping materials back into the urine to get rid of them. All right, so here we go. So what the heck is glomerular filtration? Well, this is going to be run by basic diffusion. We are going to pressurize this glomerulus, and fluids from the blood plasma are going to run out into Bowman's capsule. So what is entering here? What's moving? What's not? Well, water's going to move. Salt's going to move. Nutrients are going to pass into Bowman's capsule. Waste molecules that are going to eventually be released as urine are going to move. The thing I want you to get out of this is good stuff and bad stuff becomes glomerular filtrate. Okay? So glomerular filtrate is that 180 liters per day. This is a massive quantity of fluid constantly moving into Bowman's capsule all the dadgum time, and it's going to have to be mostly, 99% of which, is going to have to be reabsorbed into the bloodstream very, very fast indeed. So where do we do this? Well, that's going to happen via tubular reabsorption. So this is going to be a combination of both passive and active mechanisms. The idea is that nutrients and salt molecules are going to be using active transport mechanisms to be pumped back into the bloodstream. And by a side effect of pumping nutrients and salt back into the bloodstream, huge amounts of water are going to flow back into the bloodstream via osmosis. Okay, osmosis is going to dictate that this water is going to follow the salt. Water chases the salt, you got to remember this, back into the bloodstream, and a lot of this is going to happen down there in the loop of Henle. So what's kind of happy I don't know where that came from. What's kind of important about the loop of Henle is that it dips down to the renal medulla, where we have an incredibly salty area. and it's going to contain, wrapping all around the loop of Henle, a peritubular capillary network. And you need to know this. This is important. It's called the Vasa Recta. Okay? Vasa Recta means straight veins. So they basically run up and down and across and across. They're very straight. Recta, straight. Long story short. But anyway, Vasa Recta. So these are this peritubular capillary network. So as fluid is running through the proximal tubule and down the loop of Henle, lots of it, man, lots of it is going to be pumped back into the bloodstream, and then water chases those solutes back into the bloodstream as well. So this is very much vascular. And then last but not least, we have tubular secretion. Again, this is active transport mechanisms, certain ions that you need to get rid of, certain molecules that you need to get rid of. Again, like think about the acid-base balance of the body and these hydrogen ions. Think about penicillin. So penicillin is actively transported out of the bloodstream via the kidneys. This is how this works. Think about your urine-based drug tests. The nature of these is that they're looking for certain chemicals in the urine stream that aren't supposed to be there because your body actively secretes them back into these kidney tubules, right? That's tubular secretion. Yeah, so we're going to bring in lots of material via the glomerulus. Most of it goes right back into the bloodstream via tubular reabsorption, and then tubular secretion at the opposing end of this is going to be pumping things back into the urine that your body just needs rid of. And I've got a little breakdown product of who travels and who doesn't here. The idea here is this. Let's see, make sure we're good. Small things travel in via glomerular filtration. Big things stay in the blood as a result of that membrane system we talked about previously. Remember the charge in that central membrane. But small things travel, big things don't. So what gets filtered? Water goes in, nitrogenous waste goes in, nutrients goes in, salts go in as glomerular filtrate, and what stays out? There's a small critter in my little office here at 1 in the morning. Anyway, moving on. Formed elements like your blood cells, for example, your platelets, they stay in the blood because they're large, and then plasma proteins stay in the blood because of their charge. These would be dissolved in the plasma, but they stay in the blood because of their charge. Yeah, I think that'll do. So tubular reabsorption, this happens immediately. The vast majority of fluid goes right back into the bloodstream. So what gets reabsorbed? Most of the water does. The nutrients are going to be actively pumped back into the bloodstream, and then certain salts, depending upon the amount that's there, depending upon what the body needs, are going to move back into the blood as well. What stays behind? A little bit of water does to keep things flowing. The nitrogenous waste is left in the urine because that's what we're trying to get rid of. And then a little bit of salt, okay? A little bit of salt tends to stay in the urine stream as well, just to deal with the osmotic balance there and keep things flowing the way they're supposed to flow. And then last but not least, tubular secretion, an active transport mechanism. Tubular secretion is going to be how we get rid of things that we want to get rid of. Creatinine, drugs, hydrogen ions, certain things the body needs rid of are going to be moved back into the urine, and what will remain in the filtrate, yeah. So these are going to be pumped into the urine with the water, with nitrogenous waste, and with excess salts. All right, perfect. Let's go into a little bit more detail about this nephron loop just to make sure we're on the same page. I just want to make the point about the salinity gradient that's built up by this nephron loop. Again, the nephron loop dips down into the incredibly salty medulla where it's wrapped in that Vasa Recta, the capillaries that are there, where we're going to be doing some very important tasks. So, what the heck are we doing? Well, lots of ions are going to be reabsorbed back into the kidneys. A lot of salt is going to be absorbed into this medulla here. We're going to be generating a crazy salinity gradient so that when water gets down to the base of this, a lot of water is going to track into the body for maintaining general osmotic balance. Now, this is not where the story ends. The fluid that enters the distal convoluted tubule here after the nephron loop is still very much dilute, and you would die very shortly if that became urine. If all that became urine, you'd die very shortly. Still very dilute. Yeah. So the fluid arriving at the distal convoluted tubule still contains a large amount of water and a large amount of salt from glomerular filtrate, and if all that was passed, you'd be producing about 36 liters of urine per day, and since you only have about 5 liters of blood total, you'd be dead in moments. All right. So how do we get this water that's in the distal convoluted tubule? How do we get it back into the body to keep, instead of having it leave and produce this crazy urine output? Well, that's one of the roles of the collecting duct. So where is the collecting duct, team? Where is it at? Well, the collecting duct is going to be running down through this renal medulla. The collecting ducts are in these renal pyramids, as you can see here. So as part and parcel of running down through the renal medulla, they're going to be running through this incredibly salty environment. What the collecting duct does is it pulls the water out and concentrates urine. Once you enter the distal convoluted tubule, once you go into the collecting duct, what's going to be urine is there. Okay, it's there. Everything that's going to be urine is there. But there's also a lot of excess material that needs to be pulled out, like water being a classic example of this. So what does the collecting duct do? It concentrates urine. Okay, it really concentrates the urine. A lot of this by pulling the salt out, and the water chases the salt down. Yeah, so the water leaves via osmotic balance. That's absolutely true. Yeah, that'll work. So it's all about the salt, folks. The water chases the salt. All right. I tell you what, team. Let's just pause it there. Let's do this as a two-parter. I know that this is sort of a complicated lecture, so I feel like breaking it up into 2 pieces might help you out a little bit. So let's stop part 1 here on water absorption in the collecting ducts, and then we'll pick this up next time around on the hormones. All right, cool. Thanks, guys.